The night I followed my husband, I was already preparing myself to see another woman. What I wasn't prepared for was the hospital parking lot. And the truth I discovered inside that building changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage, and about the man I'd spent 26 years loving. Before I go any further, let me say something. If you've ever reached a moment in your life where the person you trusted most suddenly feels like a stranger, stay with me. And maybe tell me in the comments if you've ever felt that kind of quiet fear creeping into your home. Because at 47, I thought I understood what betrayal looked like. I was wrong. Mark and I had been married long enough to know each other's rhythms. Or at least I thought we did. We lived in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. The kind of neighborhood where the lawns are trimmed every Saturday morning and people wave when they drive past your house. Our 2 kids were grown. Emily had moved to Chicago for work. Ryan was finishing college in Michigan. For the first time in decades, the house felt too quiet. Maybe you know that feeling. When the kids leave, and suddenly the marriage that once revolved around chaos and carpools becomes just 2 people sitting across from each other at the dinner table. Have you ever looked at someone you've loved for decades and realized you don't quite know who they are anymore? That was where we were. Mark had been working longer hours lately. At least that's what he said. Late meetings, unexpected calls. Sometimes he'd come home smelling like cold air and hospital sanitizer, though I didn't notice that part until later. At the time, all I noticed was the distance. He'd sit across from me at dinner, staring at his phone. He stopped telling stories about work. He stopped laughing the way he used to. And the worst part? He stopped looking at me. You know how small things begin to pile up in your mind? A late night, a hidden text message, a quiet sigh when you ask how their day was, and suddenly your brain fills the silence with its own answers. That's how suspicion grows. Slowly, quietly, like mold in the walls of a house. Have you ever convinced yourself something was true before you had proof? Because that's exactly what I did. The first rail crack appeared one Tuesday evening. Mark said he had to work late again. But at around 9 that night, I got a strange feeling. Call it instinct. Call it paranoia. Call it the voice that whispers when something doesn't feel right. So I did something I'd never done in 26 years of marriage. I got in my car and followed him. Even now, admitting that makes me feel ashamed. But if you've ever felt your marriage slipping through your fingers, you know how desperation can change you. I kept 2 cars behind him as he drove across town. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it over the engine. I was preparing myself to see the worst. Another woman, a secret apartment, a restaurant where he'd laugh the way he used to laugh with me. But instead, Mark pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Hospital. I remember sitting there in my car, staring at the glowing emergency sign. It didn't make sense. My first thought was, maybe she works here. Maybe he's meeting someone inside. Because when your mind is already poisoned with suspicion, everything becomes evidence. So I waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. He didn't come out. That's when I made another decision I never imagined I'd make. I followed him inside. Have you ever crossed a line you never thought you would, just to know the truth? Hospitals at night feel different. The hallways are quieter. The lights are dimmer. Everything echoes. I saw Mark walking toward the elevator and slipped behind a corner before he noticed me. My heart felt like it was going to break through my chest. He pressed the button for the oncology floor. Cancer treatment. That stopped me for a moment. But again, my mind twisted the meaning. Maybe the woman was sick. Maybe he was supporting her. The elevator doors closed. I took the next one. When I reached the floor, I saw him walking down the hallway toward a private room. He knocked gently, and then he went inside. I stood there frozen. Every terrible possibility ran through my mind. And then I walked to the door. It was slightly open, and what I saw inside shattered the story I'd been telling myself. Because Mark wasn't holding another woman. He was holding my father. My dad looked smaller than I remembered. Fragile. Like time had suddenly caught up with him all at once. Mark was sitting beside his bed, holding his hand. I told you not to tell her yet, my father whispered weakly. My husband's voice cracked. I just didn't want her to go through this alone. That's when the truth hit me. Like a wave. My father had cancer. Late-stage pancreatic cancer. And Mark had known for 3 months. 3 months. 3 months of secret hospital visits. 3 months of late nights. 3 months of carrying something so heavy. He didn't know how to tell me. I pushed the door open before I could stop myself. They both looked up. And the expression on Mark's face when he saw me standing there, it wasn't guilt. It was heartbreak. "Lisa, I was going to tell you," he said quietly. But my father spoke first. I asked him not to. I walked toward the bed, barely able to breathe. "What do you mean?" My dad looked at me with tired eyes. "I didn't want your life to stop because of me." He explained everything. He had collapsed one afternoon while grocery shopping. Mark happened to be the emergency contact. Mark had been the one sitting beside him when the doctor delivered the diagnosis. Terminal. 6 months, maybe less. My father had begged him not to tell me right away, because he knew what it would do. He knew I would put my entire life on hold. And Mark had kept that promise. But keeping that promise meant carrying the weight alone. Driving across town after work. Listening to doctors. Holding my father's hand during chemotherapy. And coming home pretending everything was normal. Tell me something honestly. If you were in his place, would you have kept that secret too? Or would you have told your spouse immediately? Because standing there in that hospital room, the shame hit me like a storm. All those nights I thought he was cheating. All those silent accusations. All that resentment growing in my heart. While he had been doing something far more painful. He had been preparing to help me say goodbye to my father. I started crying. The kind of crying that comes from deep inside your chest. Mark stood up and walked toward me slowly. "I didn't want you to go through the fear until you had to," he said. That's when I realized something I had forgotten somewhere along the road of marriage. Love at this stage of life doesn't always look romantic. Sometimes it looks like sacrifice. Sometimes it looks like carrying pain quietly. So the person you love doesn't have to feel it yet. My father passed away 5 months later. And Mark was beside me every single day of that journey. Not as a man hiding something from me, but as a man trying to protect me from the worst moment of my life. Now, 3 years later, our house is quiet again. But it feels different, stronger, because that night in the hospital taught me something I wish I had understood sooner. Not every secret is betrayal. Sometimes, it's love trying its best to shield you from pain. And sometimes the worst thing you think is happening is actually someone loving you more deeply than you realized. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Have you ever misunderstood someone you love, only to discover later that their silence was hiding something completely different? If the story touched something in your own life, share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them. And if you believe it's never too late to rediscover the truth about the people we love, consider subscribing for more stories like this. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we almost misunderstood.